Hi, I'm Riley McManus. Welcome to Word for Word, where we offer you an in-depth look at some of our interviews with newsmakers from across the region. You'll have the opportunity to hear word for word how they responded to the news of the day. Small infrastructure projects, not massive financially risky ones, are the key to responsible urban development. That according to an American nonprofit organization called Strong Towns, which hosted a public event in Thunder Bay earlier this week.
And maybe before we get into tonight's presentation, what's going on here, can you maybe take me through Strong Towns itself, what exactly that is, and what does that group do?
Yeah, no, that's great. We're a nonprofit advocacy organization based out of the United States. Strongtown started as a blog talking about how cities make investments and why those investments most often don't pay off, how our development pattern relates to our prosperity. And so what we do is we advocate for a different approach to building cities, one that not only gives us a higher return on our public investments, but also gives us a higher quality of life.
And maybe looking at tonight's presentation, you might reiterate yourself because I got a feeling that might
No,
be
it's
it.
good. Yeah.
But take me through tonight's presentation. Anyone who is showing up this evening, what can they expect to get out of it?
Yeah, well, we're going to start out talking about complexity and different ways of approaching city design and building that can be complex or can be just complicated. We do a lot of things today that are really complicated, but don't have the feedback loops and the kind of reinforcing processes that traditional style development used to have. We're going to talk about different ways that cities have built themselves post-World War II and some of the financial implications of that. And then we're going to talk about ways we can do things differently, how we can have a more bottom-up approach, a more complex approach, a more people-centric approach to building, and have that pay off for us financially.
And something you touched on, something one of your colleagues mentioned last night at council, cities, municipalities are making investments that aren't paying off. Can maybe you give me some examples? Because I think you mentioned since the Second World War, are there maybe specific sectors that are causing an issue? Can you go into detail about that?
Well, in general, when we look at traditional like pre-Great Depression cities, um, let me say this a different way.
Yeah.
When we go back to the end of World War II, what we see is that we began to build cities in a very horizontal way. We started to spread things out. And there was a lot of growth that came from that, a lot of very quick kind of tax return that came from that for local governments. But local governments also took on the responsibility to maintain all those roads, all those pipes. When we look at those two inputs, right, the amount that we took on and said we would do and the amount of revenue that it gave us, there's a huge mismatch there. So cities feel poor, they're raising taxes, they're taking on more debt, they're desperately trying to get more growth, when really what they have is an insolvency problem. We've grown in a way that doesn't generate enough prosperity to actually go out and fix the stuff we promised we would fix.
And I guess obviously building off that, solution-wise for a city like Thunder Bay, based on some of the issues that you were talking about, like we were mentioning post-World War II, how does a city transition to, I guess, what you're proposing?
Right. Well, with any insolvent corporation, uh, bankruptcy is an option, but for cities it's not. And so what we have to do is take one of the other two options. One is to get more out of our existing investments, or the second is to reduce the overall amount of public investment we have. What that looks like in a practical sense is we have to take a mile of road and decide, are we going to get more out of this mile of road? We're going to have more homes along it, businesses along it, more financial productivity, or are we going to lower the overall cost of this road to the public? Making it a dirt road instead of a paved road, for example. Not having sewer and water in that part of town instead of having it, that type of thing. These are difficult conversations, but the longer we put off having them, the longer we put off having that conversation, the more difficult it becomes.
And just a couple more questions. Out of curiosity, is there other cities, municipalities that are implementing something along these lines and finding success through it?
Absolutely. Actually, Strong Towns has hundreds of cities across the U.S. that we've engaged with that are working on this in one way or the other. The thing we see most often is cities that are starting to try things now at a small scale. A big part of the Strong Towns approach is a humility that says we don't understand exactly what everybody should do, but what we should get out and do is start trying small things and seeing what works. Scale that up, make that the thing that we learn from and work off of. As opposed to bringing in a consultant to do a huge study, let's go out and kind of observe where people are having a tough time and then take what we've got on hand and start to respond to that. Those are kind of the best practices from commercial sector. Government can act in much the same way, and in terms of improving people's lives, see much the same kind of results.
And I guess for, say, the city decides it's something they're interested in, they want to move forward, how does that get implemented, and what role does your group play in that?
Well, what we try to do is start conversations. So obviously there's an elected official component of this. There's a technical staff, kind of the people who advise decision makers. They have a role in this, but the general public has a huge role in this. If only in taking these ideas and sharing them with others. These are such difficult conversations, and they can be overwhelmed by emotion and strong reaction. So what we try to do is say, we have to make this work every place we're at, and that's going to involve a broad public discourse. So we invite people to come to our website, strongtowns.org. All of our content is free. All the stuff we produce is free. It's for you to use, to read, to pass along, to educate yourself and to share with others and to have that local conversation.
It's not kicking off quite yet, but solid turnout this evening for this presentation. What does this exactly mean for the city? What are you hoping from this evening?
Well, I'm hoping for a lot. I'm so glad that Mr. Marone is here, again, to do another presentation on something that I think is critically important about our future. You know, I'm probably going to use some flamethrower language. I mean, the way that our city has developed historically it's been terrible. We have the same geographical footprint as Montreal, yet Montreal has 1.8 million people and we have 100,000+. So it's a very, very expensive city to service, just from an infrastructure perspective. And we need to think differently. We need to build differently. We need to develop differently. And if we want to manage things like the tax burden, we have to intensify, and it's urgent. Part of that too is, you know, developing environmentally sustainably, net zero, dealing with adapting to climate. So tonight is obviously a community presentation. You still see people coming in. We have a breakfast tomorrow morning with people signed up. What that shows me is that there is a deep desire for change. There is a will to do things differently. And there is a recognition that the way that we have been doing things hasn't been working and we need to change. So I think there's that will, and I'm hoping that tonight is sort of a kickoff to start some momentum for that change.
Okay, and speaking of that change, what could that look like? What could the city do to improve these things that you were speaking of? Like you were mentioning, infrastructure especially seems to be one of the highlights of Strong City. Can you speak more to that?
Well, first I want to recognize this current council and past councils for a lot of the leadership that they've shown. You know, the fact that we have, in my view, one of the most progressive new official plans, which does enable and encourage intensification, walkability, sustainability. We have our climate adaptation plan. We have our active transportation plan. We have our net zero strategies. All together, we have the policy to do good. We have to turn that into action. And we need to make sure that we follow through on our policy and strategic directions. And so this is sort of a good education, a good reminder of our sound decisions that we made in the past. And we need to make sure that we are laser focused on doing it right in the future.
And I guess process-wise, someone myself who covers council, kind of interested, if council decides this is, I guess, some of the points in the Strong City, if it's something we're interested in actually putting into action. How does the city exactly go through that? Is it as simple as bringing it up at a council meeting? Can you take me through that process?
Yeah, so really what and we're in the midst of developing this now, and I think this will inform this in the future, is when we have decision points, so when council receives a report on anything, is there this strong towns lens that's been applied to the recommendation? Has that sustainability lens been applied to the recommendation? Has that net zero lens been applied? And if it's applied, then we're making a decision that adheres to our very progressive policy. And so what this really does is it helps inform our administration on what the considerations need to be in making the recommendations to us, City Council, and then it's up to us to follow through and vote for those decisions.
Appreciate the clarification on that. My final question, just I guess looking forward, the community, it's obviously something you're speaking passionately about. Why should the community be excited that this is happening in our city, or at least it's being spoken about?
Well, I actually think it's much more important than just happening in our city. The city of Thunder Bay in the past year declared a climate emergency. And a climate emergency isn't just about Thunder Bay. We have a role to play, but we also need to be leaders in the province, which we have been. We need to be leaders in the country. And we need to put pressure on federal governments, ours and others, that the climate emergency is urgent and action is required. So I think it's important for cities across the country to show that leadership. And if you don't mind me just being extraordinarily selfish and self-centered, I have children. They're going to be here longer than I am. And I want to leave this place better than when I came in. We appear to be doing a pretty good job of messing things up. And I want to turn that ship around. And I want to be a part of turning that ship around. So for me, it's deeply personal. And so for future generations, the stakes are high. And we need to change the dial now.
Around the world yesterday, people marked International Women's Day, celebrating the progress made in the fight for gender equality. Here in Thunder Bay, the festivities got underway with the raising of the Women's Day flag at City Hall. Jan Oakley, who is a member of the Northwestern Ontario Women's Centre Board, says there is a lot to celebrate, but adds there is still so much work to be done.
So today, I think first and foremost is a day of celebration for all the gains that women have made in our society in the economic, political, social, and cultural spheres. It's also really importantly a day of action and a call to action for continued work, recognizing the gender-based violence that so many women and girls experience here in our community and also globally.
You talked a little bit about the colonialism impact as well, and that really hits here in Thunder Bay, where so many Indigenous young girls and women have gone missing or turned up dead, and there just doesn't seem to be enough response. It's days like this where we can get that message out and raise the awareness that's so important, right?
Absolutely. We know that there are years of histories of colonial violence on this land, and that is a big part of the local context, is looking at the ways in which colonialism and patriarchy are intersecting. And we see this pattern happening here in our own community. We see this pattern actually happening all around the world.
Jen, you mentioned this briefly, and I don't know if you have more to say about it, but you talked about COVID and that having an impact on potentially setting back women's equality. Anything further that you can talk about?
Sure, yeah. So research shows us that women and girls and gender diverse individuals have disproportionately experienced negative impacts in their well-being during the pandemic. So this has hit economically and socially in terms of caregiving responsibilities. We know that there's an inequality there that has been evident throughout all of the pandemics. So it's another element that we're being mindful of during International Women's Day.
You mentioned during your speech about how men need to do more to help our female counterparts, and what can the typical guy do? Whether it's for your mom or your sister or your dog, what can they do to help out?
For sure, yes. International Women's Day is definitely a day for everyone. I think often when people hear International Women's Day, they focus on women. The issue of gender parity and gender inequality is something for everyone to work on, and I certainly would call upon men to educate themselves first and foremost, and then to think about the ways in which they may be contributing, even unconsciously, to systems that are resulting in experiences of gender-based violence or sexism. This can be in their personal relationships, this can be in their professional lives. I think there's a role for everyone to play, and particularly those who have some degree of power and privilege in our world to get involved.
Goods & Co. Market was also celebrating International Women's Day with a series of networking events called Women & Company. The event was hosted by Romy Marlowe Ellis of the Uncommon Woman and Maylin Hurley of the Goods & Co. Market. Attendees were treated to a lunch with guest speaker Erin Cisco, the CEO of the Alliance Network.
So Maylin Hurley of Goods & Co. Market and myself have decided to come together to create incredible events for women, empowerment events for women across the city of Thunder Bay and the region. And we have called this collaboration Women & Company, and the goal is that we provide opportunities for women to come together, to talk about business, to talk about what it means to be a woman in business, to talk about what it means to be a woman, and really to just connect, collaborate, have deep conversations, and create a community and a hub within the city of Thunder Bay and the region for women who want to come together, women who crave connection, especially after COVID. We often feel a little bit dislocated or isolated, and so we want to solve that problem.
Is that something that's been missing here in the Thunder Bay business community? I mean, we've got the Chamber of Commerce that does its thing and networking and stuff like this, but is it something that's specific to women that has been missing?
Yeah, I think that women really thrive in connection. I mean, it's something that we've been doing since the beginning of time. Women sit in circle and we have conversation and we share. And so through COVID in particular, so many women really struggled with their mental health. I mean, the number of women that struggled with depression and suicide ideations and feelings of isolation just were astronomical during COVID. And so we just could not wait to get together and have that connection again. And I feel like now that COVID is kind of passed, not that it's passed, but now that we're through the firewall, we see the value of what we were missing in our lives maybe before. So there also has been a shift in the frequency around how often we're getting together, what we want to do when we're together, what we want to talk about. And so that's been really powerful, is just getting back to the basics of what is important. And in that, we can talk about really anything, and business is included in that, which is a really important part of what's happening in Thunder Bay.
Yeah, so Alliance was started with the goal to support women entrepreneurs in building the business of their dreams through providing them access to the right people and the right resources to make that journey a little smoother for them. And I'm here today to really celebrate women, to acknowledge, elevate, and really just show gratitude and appreciation for the women who are working really hard towards building something that is important to them, and just give them the stage that they deserve.
What do you, I guess, to have an event like this kicking off on International Women's Day to provide that empowerment?
Yeah, for me, it's really important. So I spend all of my days, I put out a post this morning that for Alliance, every day is International Women's Day, but today I feel the energy of the women coming together. I feel the rise of women in their power and really stepping towards their dreams and making a move and lifting each other up and celebrating one another and inspiring one another. And it just makes my heart so happy to see this collective rise of women in empowering and supporting one another. it just feels so good. It makes me feel so hopeful for the future.
Thanks for joining us for today's edition of Word for Word. We'll be back again tomorrow with more interviews from across the Northwest.